Welcome, skeptics and truth seekers, to Schoolhouse Crock, the podcast that fearlessly exposes the real deal behind public education in the state of Colorado. I'm your host, Stacey Castile, and on this show, we're not here to sugarcoat. We're here to unveil the truths, challenge the norms, and unpack the crock of you-know-what that often goes unnoticed in the realm of education. Thank you so much for joining us today. On our episode, we will be discussing a variety of topics, such as electric school buses, International Baccalaureate Program, a State of Colorado House of Representatives rep from El Paso County, Stephanie Vigil, who has been saying some alarming things, as well as bathroom security. First, before we start on this episode, I would like to give my condolences to the victims of the University of Colorado Springs shooting that happened recently. When parents send their children off to school, we often hope that there's nothing to worry about and that they're going to be safe and they're going to get a quality education. It is a very tragic and unfortunate event, and I just would like to give my condolences to their families. I don't believe anybody should ever have to bury their babies. Our first topic today is going to be about electric school buses. A lot of school districts throughout the state of Colorado are beginning to look into the options of electric school buses as an alternative to diesel school buses. No matter what your stance is on electric vehicles or diesel vehicles, I wanted to kind of point out some things that I think should be considered and thought about, and I hope that you guys will take these areas into consideration. And no matter your stance or what you think, just to get up there and speak to your school board about your feelings one way or the other. I broke down some of these things into different categories. So the first category that I think that we need to take into consideration is the financial aspect of electric school buses. One of the biggest costs would be obviously purchasing the electric school buses. Most people who are looking at buying a new vehicle can see immediately upfront the cost of an electric vehicle is more than a diesel vehicle, and the same pertains to the school bus aspect of the electric vehicles. So there are more upfront costs for the buses, but then also there are rebates available from the government. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that that's a good thing or a bad thing, but also at what point do the rebates stop? And does the rebate actually make it worth purchasing the electric vehicle? One of the areas that I think that this is kind of compatible would be in the solar panel aspect. And although I've never owned solar panels or had solar panels installed, I do know some people who have. And they said that honestly, they purchased it for the better of the environment and to utilize some of the solar energy that is put off by the sun, especially living in Colorado with having so many sunshine days. But they said that truthfully, the rebate probably wasn't what got them to do it. So if that's your only reasoning for doing it, they said that probably wasn't. And I can only assume that that would probably be the case here with the electric vehicles as well. In addition to the cost of purchasing the electric school buses, there's also the cost of implementing the actual charging stations. One of the questions that I also had about like charging stations would be, would we just need them at the bus yard, or would we need to implement some throughout the city? If we look at how the city of Greeley is set up, the school buses are located actually on the east side of town over by Highway 85 and Highway 34 over in that area. And if you're going all the way out to Taunton or Northridge or Winograd, I mean, that's the exact opposite side of town. So would we need to install charging stations somewhere else throughout the city as well? Something, that is definitely one of the big proponents for supporting electric vehicles is that there's no fuel and there's no maintenance as what you would have with a diesel vehicle, but also there is the cost of the batteries. And there were some claims that the tires needed to be replaced more frequently. Some people claim that the battery costs actually outweigh the fuel savings and the maintenance savings that someone would get with an electric vehicle. And then something else with that, if the battery cost outweighs it, how long do the batteries last for? And we have become more of a battery reliant society. We do know it depends on how we take care of the battery, how we are using it, how we are charging it. And along those lines, we need to have an understanding of the life of the batteries and how often they need to be replaced. Because if batteries need to be replaced more often than what a diesel bus would need, is that really saving us money when we are having to spend more to replace batteries than what we would with having to potentially purchase a new diesel school bus? Another area that I grouped these into was kind of the capability aspect. So we know that these have zero emissions, which does help and reducing the pollution into the air and the quality of the air that students, teachers, passengers, people nearby would be inhaling. Something to also consider would be the max mile range for the electric vehicles. Going back to how often the batteries would need to be replaced would also probably have depending on how far you're driving these batteries. It appears that a school bus would have about 100-mile distance before it would need to charge again. When we're driving around before and after school, getting kids to and from school, here in Greeley is 100 miles something that a school bus would regularly do? Is that more than what a school bus is required to do? I know that we do have a staggering school start and school ending time, and part of that is to help with the impact on our school buses to, make sure that we have enough buses and drivers for the number of students that we have. And so this kind of helps alleviate needing more buses and more drivers, but that does also mean that the buses and the drivers are on the road for a longer period of time. And is this something that, would be affected? And then if you also think about it in terms of going on a field trip, so say that there's an event down in southwestern Colorado. Well, we know that's more than 100 miles. And so would that be an issue? Would we need to have a diesel school bus in that situation? Or would we have to allocate for time for the bus to stop somewhere at a charging station and charge? One of the other things to take into consideration, especially living in the state of Colorado during winter months, is what kind of impact the cold weather has on the electric vehicles. Do they function as well? It doesn't take them as long to warm up as what it would a diesel vehicle, but also the mile distance that the bus can go would be reduced due to the cold weather. Something that we would also need to take into consideration is how long do the buses need to charge for? It seems on average about 8 to 9 hours, but also we need to keep in mind that the school buses are bigger, there's more batteries, and therefore it needs more charging time than what a regular vehicle would be. So that's something that also take into consideration, because I know a lot of people, my family, we play a game instead of the slug bug game, we play the Tesla game. And every time we see a Tesla on the road, we rush to be the first one to call it out and point it out, and then we get a point. So we're starting to see more and more of these electric vehicles and electric scooters on the road, but we also need to kind of keep in mind that an electric bus, just like it needs more gasoline, it's going to need more electricity. And what kind of ramifications does that have on our utilities? I thought this was really interesting. And I just wanted to kind of point this out. One of the things that had been stated about the electric vehicles when just doing research and chatting with friends about this topic was how quiet they are. So that could definitely be a pro, especially when you listen to a diesel bus that can, sometimes be a little bit louder. But also one of the downsides could be if a pedestrian does not hear it coming and maybe they're not paying attention to the best that they probably should be. Is that an issue in terms of pedestrian safety? If a bus is so quiet, they don't hear it and then they walk into traffic or walk into the street and then get hit by the bus. That's something that, we probably need to take into consideration. How do we continue to alert the public that, hey, there are quieter cars on the road these days? And then another thing to consider that I thought was important to also take into consideration was the weight of the batteries. These batteries can weigh up to 8,000 pounds. That would create the bus to weigh more, without people on it than what a diesel bus would be. And so, going back to the financial aspect of it all, where they were talking about the tires having to be replaced more frequently, is that due to the increase in weight? You would need to speak with your school district more to find out what they're currently thinking in terms of electric school buses. But some of the research that I found said anywhere from 2 to a couple dozen batteries would be needed to power these school buses. So you're looking at quite a bit of extra weight. And then also, like I had stated, the school buses require more electricity, therefore they require more charging, more electricity. And what are the ramifications of that on our utilities and on our power grid? I think, especially during the summertime, we've heard of situations in the state of California where they are talking about you can't charge your vehicles between these hours. I even know in the city limits of Fort Collins, during the summertime, you cannot do laundry or run your dishwasher at certain times, or if you do, you have to pay a premium in cost. And that's just because during those times, the strain on the power grid is higher, typically because of air conditioning. But if we wrap in electric school buses to this, what is that ramification? There is a city in Illinois that was discussing implementing a 30 truck fleet. So we're talking about trucks, not school buses, but I thought this was pretty comparable considering the trucks are a little bit smaller than a school bus. But when this company was talking to the city about getting charging stations and how much electricity they were going to need to pull, the city had actually said no because it was going to require more electricity to charge and power 30 trucks than what the entire city was currently using as a whole. So do our cities, do our towns, do our areas, do they have the capacity to support this additional strain on our power grid? And then finally, something else that I think that we need to take into consideration is the fires. A story that I heard out of the Denver metro area was two friends were in an electric vehicle that was involved in an accident in which the driver was knocked unconscious. The passenger jumped out and slammed his door shut and ran around to open up the driver's side door to get his friend out. The vehicle had caught on fire and he needed to save his friend. But what he didn't know was that once the doors were shut, he was not going to be able to open the doors from the outside. And so he ended up watching his friend burn to death because he couldn't get him out of there. He couldn't save him. Is that something that we need to take into consideration when we are putting potentially 20, 30 children on an electric school bus? Also, when these electric vehicles are starting on fire, it's more than what a typical diesel car fire would be. They burn hotter, they burn faster, and they are more destructive than diesel vehicle fires. If an electric vehicle is in a garage, or say it's an electric scooter in an apartment complex, the fire department's very first goal is to try to move that vehicle to a destination in which it will cause the least amount of damage. So if it's in your garage, they try to hook up a chain and pull it out of the garage to try to reduce the amount of damage to your house. Also, because they burn so hot and it's a different type of fire, a regular fire extinguisher is not sufficient enough to put it out. Fire departments are having to invest in specialized fire extinguishers to help them put these fires out. And then once they do get the fire extinguished, that battery has to be submerged into what I have been told is a shipping container size tank of water for at least 30 days, because the batteries continue to reignite even after being extinguished. We've seen some videos. There was one out of Texas at a pumpkin patch where one electric vehicle in the parking lot started on fire, and in a blink of an eye, multiple vehicles were on fire. I know that that's not necessarily something that people want to think about, but I do think it's something that we need to be educated on and aware of, because we could be endangering kids inadvertently, all in the name of being friendly to the environment. I think something that we should also start talking about a little bit more too is the option of natural gas vehicles. I know that the Greeley-Evans Transit has gone to natural gas vehicles, natural gas buses. And although those are not zero emissions like the electric vehicles, they are still better than the diesel vehicles. There's a 12% lower global impact by using natural gas vehicles. So these are just some of the things to think about, to talk about. Maybe ask your school districts what their plans are, what they're looking at, and what their plans are in some of the situations, like field trips. What would be the alternative for them, or what is their response? I think on paper, to say, yes, I care about the environment, and yes, I'm going to do everything that I can to make the environment better or preserve the environment, is a great cause. But also, I think we need to also look at the other side of this all. All right. Our next topic today is the state of Colorado, House District 16 Representative Stephanie Vigil. House District 16 is El Paso County. Ms. Vigil was elected in November of 2022, and she will be up for re-election this November because our House reps terms are 2 years. The reason that I wanted to bring this representative to everybody's attention is because recently she's been saying a lot of alarming things and things that kind of prove some of the concerns that parents have, that the school districts are trying to take away their parental rights and actually be the guardians of the students as opposed to the parents. Unfortunately, Ms. Vigil had a traumatic childhood. She has been very open in talking about her childhood at school board meetings, and that is a very unfortunate situation. Unfortunately, childhood abuse is a thing, but just because one student was abused does not mean that all students are being abused. It doesn't mean, one parent was making bad choices or harming their children. Doesn't mean that all children are making bad choices and harming children. But this history of hers has forced her or allowed her to start advocating for public schools to have more of a say over a child than a parent. She thinks that government schools have better decision-making capability for children than parents do. She thinks that they should have more control over the children. She, pushes for equity. She is a part of the LGBT community, and so a lot of the stuff that she tends to focus on children of that community. She has been a supporter of the House Bill 24-1039, which is the non-legal name change. Again, she just thinks that the schools should be forced to call children by what they want to be called by, even if that means keeping the parents out of that decision. Again, she does not believe that they should be punished. She thinks that that should be allowed. And then also a bill that she is supporting is House Bill 24-1040, which is Gender Affirming Healthcare Provider Study. According to the Colorado General Assembly website, it just says that the study must determine the number of gender-affirming healthcare providers and facilities in each region without disclosing identities of providers, the resources available to gender-affirming healthcare providers and facilities in the state, threats to gender-affirming healthcare providers, the number of patients seeking gender-affirming healthcare services in each region, including the ratio of patients to providers in each region without disclosing identities of patients or providers. The types of gender-affirming healthcare services that patients seek, the prevalence and impact of non-prescribed treatments, and the availability of insurance coverage for different types of treatment. Of course, it requires more bureaucracy and a third party that the department contracts with to conduct the study to seek input from specified persons. It's just kind of weird. It doesn't necessarily say if this gender-affirming healthcare provider is for children or for adults, but this is kind of put up by the Colorado Youth Advisory Council Review Committee. So it's, assuming that they're also just advocating again for the gender affirming of youth in the state of Colorado. Like I said, Representative Vigil is up for re-election this November. So if you or someone you know lives in House District 16 or El Paso County, please talk to them about this, educate them, because I honestly believe that a majority of people who are aware of some of the legislation may not realize that she supports it. And I'm not sure if that is something that lines up with their values. I know that oftentimes people don't want to be involved, or they don't think that there's a purpose, or they think that it doesn't matter anyways. But the more that we come together and the more that we unify over protecting our children, the better it's going to be for our children. If we are willing to take on the financial burden of putting in electric vehicles, then we need to also be willing to stand for our children and say no. Again, like I said, I don't condone parents abusing their children, and I do realize that that is an issue, but I think that is a small percentage of parents as opposed to the general group of parents of students. And so to take away parental rights, I mean, not even just away from parents who don't beat their kids, but also they're trying to make decisions for children who do not identify as LGBT. Like, they're trying to push stuff through for a small percentage of students. It just doesn't seem to make sense to me. So again, like I said, if you are in House District 16, or if you know anybody in House District 16, please have them, even if they just go to the website, the Colorado General Assembly website, and look at Stephanie Vigil, you can see some of the stuff that she's supported in 2023 and in 2024. Even just clicking on 2023, it talks about how she sponsored House Bill 23-1057, which was amenities for all genders in public buildings. She's definitely pushing for gender affirming legislation, and I'm not sure that really lines up with the beliefs of the citizens of El Paso County. All right. And the final topic for this week's podcast episode is bathroom security. So, this is more of just a PSA rant, if you would, for parents. Recently, at my daughter's school, they had to start implementing scanning and security standing outside of the bathrooms. Apparently, it is a preferred place for students to hang out, to congregate, to do things that they shouldn't be doing and fighting, and it's causing a massive issue. So I think that it's really important for us parents to make sure that we're having these conversations with our children. Obviously, I think that all parents should be making sure that their children are not vaping, because obviously that's not a good life choice to be making. And if they're vaping in the bathrooms and they are going to get caught, then, they need to deal with the ramifications of that, the consequences of that. Part of the reason that the school ended up having to do this was because there were always multiple children in the bathroom at once. And then if it was detected that the children were vaping, but there was a group of kids, how is the administration supposed to know who it was that was vaping? Do all the kids just get let free, or do they pull all of the kids in to do backpack and pocket searches? Well, what happened was that a couple of students had this issue multiple times, and their parents called the school and were complaining that their children were being searched multiple times. And it's kind of like, okay, at this point, as a parent, we need to step in and say, why is our child being searched? Is it because they are constantly in the bathroom when things that are not supposed to be happening are happening? Okay, then we as parents need to step up, and we need to parent our kids, and we need to make sure that they are aware of what's appropriate and what is not. This is high school. They're getting ready to go into the real world. Could you imagine if you were on a break at work and everybody was congregating in the bathroom? That would be weird. I was actually told a story that they had, I think it was like 8 girls in one bathroom stall. Well, what's going on in that stall? Because it's most definitely not someone using the bathroom, because I can't even imagine how all of them fit in there. So we often talk about testing scores and, what our children are being taught and so on and so forth. But as parents, we need to be doing our due diligence to make sure that our students are being sent to school and behaving like appropriate adults, because that's what they are, young adults. Are they behaving like appropriate young adults? Because when they are not, and time is being taken away to do bathroom monitoring, then that's time taken away from other students. That's time taken away from your student. In addition to some of the vaping, the fighting, there's vandalism. That's another major issue in the bathrooms. And I understand that we may get frustrated with someone, a student may get frustrated with someone, but we also need to be having the conversation with our children about what's the appropriate way to handle it and what is not an appropriate way to handle it. When my daughter realized that she had to scan her student ID to go into the bathroom, she was really kind of put off by that, because she doesn't feel like she should have to scan her student ID just to go to the bathroom. Like, she just has to go to the bathroom. And I get that. I totally do. That's the way that it should be, right? When I go into a public bathroom and I go into my home bathroom, I have heard people say that they have to scan to go into the bathroom at their work. I've never been in a workplace like that, unless it was like to scan to go into the breastfeeding room that was in the bathroom, but even then, not to do a basic human function, such as go to the bathroom. And so I understand that, but this is where us parents have to stand up and step up and start being accountable and making our kids be accountable, because other kids are suffering because of the choices of a few other students. That does it for this week's episode. Thank you guys again for joining me. Please give me some feedback. Love any feedback that you guys have. If there's a topic you guys want to hear about, if there's a guest you would like me to be introducing, I am open to your suggestions. You can email me at stacy4d6@gmail.com. Also, that will be in the notes of the show. You can also find me on X at Schoolhouse Croc, and that will also be in the notes. Thank you so much. Have a blessed week.